Great. Okay, we're 1 minute after. I think let's get started. So I'm Shelley Stahl. I'm with the American Geophysical Union. I'm our Senior Director for Data Leadership, and I'm delighted to be today's moderator. So this seminar series is a year-long seminar, and it is we have collaborating partners that all work together to get this all organized. And we actually have some new partners. So let me tell you about that. So we partner with AAAS Science, the American Astronomical Society, the American Chemical Society, the American Meteorological Society Board of Data Stewardship. Newly added is the British Ecological Society, the Council of Scientific Society Presidents, also newly added the Ecological Society of America, Federation of American Societies for Experimental Biology, the Federation of Associations in Behavioral and Brain Sciences, and the International Union of Pure and Applied Chemistry. We are so delighted to have everyone participate with us. So today's talk is called Culture Change, How Studying Monarchs Inspires Transparent and Reproducible Science. And full disclosure, Elise and Kayla study more than just monarchs. So that just happens to be one of the taxa, I think I got the right word there, that there are actually, no, that's species. Oh, she'll fix this in a moment when she gets on. But one of the interesting things that they do, which we are so excited to have them here. Let's see what else to share with you. So let me start with a little bit of information about AGU. Thank you, Laura. And I'm going to share my screen, apparently slowly. And I'm going to do my desktop because I didn't test this earlier and I'm afraid I'm going to lose you all. So if my kids text something weird, you'll know what happened. Alrighty, so I want to tell you a little bit about the work of AGU. So and some of our partners outside of the society space that you might be interested in getting involved with and looking into. So first of all, I want to share with you the work that Chris Erdman and I do within data leadership. Chris is my colleague, and we try to get as much information to our members as possible around data and software. And this is our main page. So you're welcome to explore this. There's different tabs and resources. But if I had to pick a spot for you to explore first, and I'll put the links into the chat, and they'll be in the resources of all this information of the entire seminar later today. The one resource I would really like to share with you is this one here. Chris stood up a GitHub for us, and we've been putting blog posts and different resources and continuing to build this out. And this is where we have our common journal guidance for our authors, as well as information about digital presence, working with Jupyter Notebooks within publication, software citation, which we're really excited about. If you are within the Earth and Space Sciences, you can join our Core Trust Seal cohort for repositories and more. And we're also willing to certainly link in relevant elements from other folks. We don't host the resources here. They're usually on Zenodo or another persistent location. But this is something that I just want to share with you as a resource available. And many of these things are, doesn't really matter what your discipline is, so you're welcome to explore it. The folks that we work with within the Earth and Space Sciences informatics community, or ESIP, so Earth Science Information Partners. Susan Shinkeldecker is their executive director, and she is just amazing. We love working with them. They host our data help desk at our fall meetings, as well as other societies, including AMS and GSA and ESA. And more, EGU. Who am I forgetting? I'm sure I'm forgetting somebody. Yep, I think I mostly got them. And that's an incredible resource for our researchers, and they're funded by US government agencies, and hopefully I'll get this right, NOAA and NASA and USGS, and a little bit of funds coming through EarthCube with the National Science Foundation. So just highlighting that community and how important they are within the Earth and Space Sciences. And then the Coalition for Publishing Data on the Earth and Space Sciences, this is all of the publishers and repositories coming together to work through challenges, and has been an incredible community to deal with real issues. If you want to take a look at the commitment statement associated with the Enabling Fair Data Project, this is one of the things that we've done that has really moved the ball forward significantly. And there are a number of challenges still to go, which is why we have this seminar series. And then finally, I want to invite everyone, especially societies, to consider joining the Organizational Assembly for the Research Data Alliance. This is an international community. The American Chemical Society just joined this week. I just saw the email this morning. Thank you so much. This is an opportunity to be right at the front of learning about what's coming through with new standards, new recommendations. I'll be cautious here because they're not a standards body, but they do have a standards body they work with. But new recommendations and the standing up of new working groups to help deal with some of the problems that continue to exist. So take a look at that as a possible opportunity for your organization. This is a little different than a member. Being a member of RDA, being a member is free. Being an organizational member, there is a fee to join. So just heads up on that. And those are the things I wanted to share today. So let me stop sharing and introduce our two speakers. I'm so excited. The Zipkin Lab and Elise Zipkin have been such a fun group to learn about, especially within our work at AGU and this particular seminar series. And many thanks to the British Ecological Society and the Ecological Society of America, because that's how I met Elise. So she's the director of the Ecology, Evolution, and Behavior program at Michigan State University. She's also the associate editor for the Journal of Animal Ecology. Her quantitative ecology lab develops mathematical and statistical models to study the distribution and demographics of populations and communities. And I'm going to let her go into all of those details because that's not something I can speak about authoritatively. So we'll just let her do that. And one of the folks within her lab, Kayla Davis, she's a Ph.D. candidate, and her dissertation work is focusing on assessing seabird distribution as part of the Gulf of Mexico Marine Assessment Program for Protected Species. I'm so delighted to have them here with us, and we are going to do a conversation. So let's see. I'm wondering if I can I probably can't pin more than one person. So forgive me for not being able to do that, but I think that's probably okay. Elise, do you want to introduce yourself more thoroughly than what I just did?
Sure. Do you want me to go a little bit into the open science thing from our lab too, what we're doing related?
Sure. Yeah, go right ahead.
Yeah, so thanks so much, Jelly, for the invitation and for the introduction. Yep, I think that sums up pretty well what we do. We study, we think of it as kind of the grand challenges related to conservation biology and at the intersection of ecology and statistics, where we're developing these models to try and look at why are populations declining, why are whole communities, which species and communities are declining, what's affecting those changes, things like climate change and land use change. And we work on a huge variety of species. So monarchs is one system that we've been working on for about a decade. But as you heard with Kayla, we're also working on seabirds, and we work on songbirds and snakes and amphibians and all sorts of things. So we really have a wide range of things that we work on. And another thing I think that's really important about what we do for this conversation is we really don't collect our own data. So we mostly use data from other sources because a lot of our questions tend to be large spatial and temporal scope. So the monarch question is really, the stuff related to monarchs is really a good example of that. So we have, these we're looking at trying to understand continental scale declines. Why are monarchs declining? And, they have this spectacular migration from Mexico all the way up to Canada. And no researcher, you can start to think like no researcher could collect the amount of data that you would need to study that, over, 30 years, right? So we tend to work with a lot of volunteer-based citizen science data. And we also work with these kind of large scale, like NSF Neon and other kinds of breeding bird and assessments and stuff. And like Kayla is going to be talking about too a little bit, like the seabirds bringing protected programs. So other things that we work with. And I think that is important for what we do, because different in a lot of open science, and a lot of people are interested, in archiving their data. But because we're developing new models, the big thing that we're really interested in is archiving our code. So the models, we develop models that we hope other people will use. We try and answer interesting ecological questions, but a lot of what we do is, developing these kinds of models. How do you estimate the distributions of species? How do you integrate data types? How do you account for sampling biases and different modeling structures? And that's a lot what we do. So one of the big things is we want to make our models accessible, transparent, reproducible. We want people to use them. And so that's been a big kind of motivation for, this open science. So I want to talk a little bit about what we do and why. So our lab has this GitHub code repository, and we also have this front-facing web page. So where we archive, everything that we've done for a project once a paper is published, or sometimes before. We archive everything that we've done. If we're allowed to, if the data are non-proprietary, we post the data that we use, even if they're posted elsewhere, because a lot of times there's a post-processing with that. So the refining of the data can be part of it. Sometimes we have data that we're not allowed to post, but we keep that separately for our own self. So we always, archive that and have access to it. But then a big thing is the code of what we've done. So, and we try and post, the full process. So the code for processing the data, the code for doing the analysis, the code for post-processing. We have this process. One of the reasons I asked Kayla to join us here is because she's one of the people in charge. We have two people in the lab that kind of work on this and have this, like, are updating it, making sure everything works and working with each other. And we also have a lab policy, like a checklist on our GitHub site, where we talk about, okay, what are the elements that need to go into this code archive? And I wanted to say a little bit about why I do this, because I think when I first started in the lab, I have tenure now, but I started at Michigan State in 2014. And, this has been in my mind for a while, but we really started going in probably 2015 or 2016. And, it takes up a lot of time to do this. It's a lot of work. It's this ongoing process. We have lab meetings about it every semester. So twice a year, is this working? What do we need to do? All these things. And so, like, I had to get this buy-in, with my students and everybody, like, there's a value in doing this. And so I'll tell you, for me, it was this. It was like these embarrassing moments where people would ask me for stuff on a project, that had happened a few years before. Hey, I've got this series of questions. How did you do this? How did you do that? And I can't reproduce it, or I'm going through my old code, and as a grad student, this code that I'd had that was like final, model, final. And then I was like, final 2, final 3, all these old codes. And then I'm like, I don't even know which is the final code to really send it to them, if this happened later. And so there was this really embarrassing moment where when I published this paper in Methods, Ecology, and Evolution when the journal first came out. So I think it's like a 2010 paper. And I was transitioning over from my postdoc. I worked for the USGS, the US Geological Society, for 6 years. And I was transferring over from them over to Michigan State. And it was during this move. And this person wrote me this long email asking me questions. So that was the beginning of 2014. So 4 years after the paper had been published. And that's already several years after you stopped kind of doing the analysis. And they wrote me this long series of questions and about that paper and how I did it. And I was just overwhelmed. I was like, I can't even answer this. I'm in this middle of this move, whatever. Usually I try and answer people, even if I can't completely, say something. I'd say, here's what I have or whatever. This one, I couldn't even answer it. I was transferring over my files. It was so embarrassing. And I was just I just don't want that to be the thing of, what we do. We're developing these models, we're trying to get people to use them. And, I don't want it to be, I want it to be you know, good and something where we can show people and not have those embarrassing moments. So I use that as motivation for my students. I was like, look, you don't want to be embarrassed. It's so bad. And you think you know what's happening, but you're only going to remember maybe a year. You'll remember maybe. You're definitely not going to remember it 4 years. You're not going to remember a decade. I mean, people.
That is absolutely the truth. So let me let Kayla say hello and introduce herself as well. And then let's circle back on that because the motivation is so real.
I know.
Thank you, Shelley. Yeah, thank you for the introduction. And yeah, so I'm Kayla Davis. I'm a PhD student in the Zipkin lab. And as Shelley said, I study seabirds in the Gulf of Mexico. And like our lab, I, like everybody else in our lab, I develop statistical approaches for analyzing these data. And so seabird data can be kind of tricky to work with because they are often dispersed patchily throughout this like huge marine environment, but they also aggregate in these giant feeding flocks. So that data can be kind of tricky to work with. And so what my research is doing is finding kind of alternative approaches for dealing with those data. And like Elise said, I am working on the GitHub code archive in our lab. And I kind of came on once this was somewhat established. And so I had actually already kind of bought into this mindset of making data reproducible. I also had a similar situation where the first project that I worked on, I completed the data processing and the analysis in a MS Access database, which was a nightmare. And so I already realized like, oh, there's a better way to do this. We have to do this in a reproducible and more transparent way. So I kind of came into the lab having had that mindset, but yeah, I've learned a lot definitely working with Elise, and it's been, I'm glad to have had her as a motivator to really get behind this data reproducibility and transparency idea.
Absolutely fantastic. So one of the things that I really find, the word refreshing comes to mind, but just real is the motivation that the lab has had, that you, Elise, have had, is it comes from wanting to be a better researcher, wanting to know exactly what version is where, and the value of it being transparent, which is interesting. So there's two things, if you could talk a little bit more about this, that embarrassing thing, like I don't want to ever not know exactly what went into my research ever, like that piece. And then the second piece is, and I want to share it. And I want to share it not only within my team, but also openly. Those two are, it really vexes a lot of researchers. And I think if we could explore that along with Kayla, I think that would be really a neat thing to share with everyone here.
Well, one of the things that's so hard about that is the reality, is that it's not part of the current process of publishing a paper or completing a project. And I think that is really important. Like especially when we started, I mean, now, there's maybe a little bit more rewards for this in terms of like getting invited to do a talk, but it's not part of the thing that you get tenure rewarded on. It's starting to be required by publications, but the reality is, and funders too, but the reality is there's not like a huge checkup on it, right? So everybody knows that you can post code and data in a way that's like just not useful. You could put something in Zenodo, you can put something up there that makes it seem like it's there, but it's actually not really useful. So I think, we think about that a lot. Like I said, I think one of our motivations is that we develop these models that we want other people to use. I mean, yes, Kayla's working on seabirds and doing this analysis, but also, she's developing these models that we hope other people will use. And I did think it started with, one of the projects I worked on early was community modeling during my dissertation. And I developed this website because people were asking me all the time, like how to do that. And pretty early on, I developed this USGS website, which we've now moved the important pieces over to the code archive of like how you do these basic models, and I'd written out how to do that. And I'd spent time commenting the code. So I'd had experience from people asking me to do that. And that's kind of, that was already, 2009, 10. So pretty long time ago. So I'd kind of got on this idea of like, yeah, people need to understand, how to use this. Even if you just put up the code, that's not necessarily valuable. And then there's one other aspect I think is important, just so I don't forget to talk about. When we put this up, first of all, it's a work in progress. We're always working on it. I thought at the beginning, like, oh, we would just like have this checklist, we would do it, we never do it. But issues come up with like every project. And so that's why we're always meeting about this, as a group, like, how do we resolve this? What do we have to do? Do we need to put up the full code to reproduce every single figure, or do we just need to put the post-processing? And this is something we're always discussing. And one thing I do think that's worth mentioning is, if you look at our code archives, right? People in the lab have different amounts of levels of which I want to document every single tiny thing I've done and all the like steps and previous versions to doing it, versus I want to do the, put out the final code and it cleaned up, and, it's a little bit about post-processing and how to produce the figures, but it's not the full thing. So one, I think, is this idea that you accept that people have different views of how this can go. We have some minimum standards that need to be met for a project to be complete up on there. But one, people have different approaches of how to do that, and that's okay. And two, if not every single piece of that project is up there, that's also okay. So like, we've also come to this realization, if somebody asks me about something up there, in 10 years, I have papers up there that are getting pretty old. So if we have papers up there and they ask me about it, and it's okay for me to be like, look, I don't really know anymore. Everything that we have related to this is up there. And that is also something that we've decided is okay, right? So because you can't, it'll be hard to continue to remember everything through time. You do the best that you can. It meets the standard that we decide, which other people in the lab look through. And then if somebody asks you about some other thing, which that still happens, if you can't answer that, or even if you honestly don't want to take the time to answer that, it's okay, because you put all that stuff up there and you say, that is what is up there. That is what is available. And so I think that is an important part too, because you can kind of get sucked into like, sometimes not feeling there's always more that you can do and more that you can put up there. And so us being comfortable with like, well, what we have up there is okay, is part of it too.
That really is important. And I think it also, you talk about the evolution, you talk about how you ask yourselves, should I have done more? Could I do more? Is this enough? Can you look and see if you think this is enough? So, an internal check within your own team. And Kayla, you mentioned something earlier today when we were talking about what those internal checks look like. Can you talk about that some more?
Right. Yeah. So we do have a checklist in our lab for the kind of the minimum standards of what we include in the code archive. And those things include things like, okay, the data need to be there, right? And the code to process the data needs to be there. Of course, our lab does develop models. So the code, a well-explained, commented out code to run the data, analyze the data, whatever that model code is, needs to be there. And then Elise mentioned a lot about the post-processing, and really what that is what do we do with the data after it comes out of that model? How do we format it in a way that makes it understandable and goes into a paper that tells a story, right? So things like the figure code, sometimes we include that. So those are the pieces that go into the paper. And so Elise talked a lot about, a lot of earlier papers, maybe they just had the model code, and sometimes that wasn't always commented out really well. Well, that's not that useful, right? Because if you're new to a model, if you've developed a new model, like nobody knows how to use it but you, right? So you need to make sure that it's well commented. And also for me, one thing that's really important is the data that goes into that model. I get a lot of questions from other students sometimes about, well, how did you get your data even in the format to go through this model, right? So for me, that component is really important, because the data processing and manipulation takes up a lot of our time. Like the actual running of the model, that doesn't take that long to do. Like I think 60 to 70% of my time at least has been spent figuring out what format the data need to be in and how to clean that and make it usable. So that component to me is really important, and something I would like to see become more prominent in this focus of like data transparency.
Was that when you talk about saving like the pre-processing, the actual model itself and the post-processing, are you thinking of like the pre-processing part here? Like how did you get from this source of data to what actually ran through the model?
Exactly. Yes.
Okay. Okay. And in general, are you including that in your transparent package, like the package that you put together?
Yeah, so it varies from project to project, right? Because sometimes the data are proprietary and we can include the code, but we can't include the raw data
Sure.
that we used at the very beginning. So it does vary a little bit, but for the most part, I think all of our projects include some component of data pre-processing where we're doing something to manipulate it so that it's in some format to go through our models.
Okay. And so when we talk about it on the journal side, I think I probably glop all three together and say, share your workflow. And
Right.
maybe it would make more sense for me to say, listen, share your pre-processing, share your model, share your post. Okay. All right. So you're helping me, and Chris is online too. And thank you. I see you're already providing useful information to the chat.
Yeah,
I mean, I think that's useful because, like I said, and this takes a while to figure it out too. There's a lot of ways that you could share your workflow that are not useful. And I don't know that even people might know they're doing it, but I think a lot of people, it takes time to make it useful, right? What you did, what was useful for you isn't necessarily useful what's outside for the whole world, right? So you have to, the commenting, I mean, she's right. Like Kayla's totally right. Like if you've got a new model, you have to comment out pieces of it that in your own head, you already know. So, there's ways that to think about making the science really useful for people into the future, does take time and thought, and writing out those different steps is helpful. And by the way, I really also say it's for selfish reasons too, because in our lab, new people come in, we have a new student, Wendy Lubenberger, she's working on some butterfly stuff. And I'm like, go to the archive, go to the GitHub archive and look up this paper, how it's done, because we're gonna, work off that kind of model. So it also saves time, for our lab in terms of doing that. Otherwise, she'd have to go back to the person who worked on that code, who may or may not still be at the lab, and, and deal with their files that weren't necessarily well organized. If we've got this spot here, it allows us to do our own work more efficiently too, because of course in science, everything builds off each other.
Yeah, that with the way you just said that, I don't think I've ever thought about your research having an educational element to it. Like, I don't think I've ever thought in my mind that we always really need to have that piece. It's not only just, what your findings were, but you need to actually educate your colleagues on what you did, and that documentation. Can you talk to, you've mentioned previously about the fact that this has been iterative, that when you started envisioning a better way, that there wasn't really a manual. So it was what made sense to you, what you learned from, and this feedback loop that you've set up where you're, I'm not sure if you mentioned it here in front of everyone, so I'll ask you to talk about it again, re-examining your practices in a very deliberate way. Do you see efficiencies? Like, was it harder and now easier? Like once you adopt these practices, did you all of a sudden see problems get solved that were just huge? Or maybe not so huge, but important.
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear what Kayla says. So I definitely want to give this over to her, but yes, I think, those first sets of guidelines that we worked on through, and, we don't necessarily, even the guidelines, you can see, we don't update the big guidelines that much. This is sort of a little bit more internal. And some of that, maybe we should, because you're making me think about that. Like some of it is institutional knowledge, right? Like we try to have Kayla's more senior graduate student who's code archive, and now we have a more junior one who's also working on that. There's 2 students that work on this. So we have the lab institutional knowledge that gets passed down and, doesn't get lost. And we also by the way, to have graduate students run this as opposed to postdocs, because they're there longer. This is a job that I think benefits from seeing the length of time within the lab.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, I think that's true. And I think, the minimum sort of thing of like, just starting with like commenting your code, what does it mean to that? But I also think some of it's a little nuanced, and Kayla can probably speak to that. Like you start seeing, because she's looking through, one of the jobs is they actually check all the code that it runs. They're not necessarily checking for it to be right, but that it runs, right? This is kind of at the end, before we post it up. We know it runs, at least on the versions that we have. And we thought about, archiving a whole version of the R and all that, because in the future, there's no guarantee that it necessarily will run on a new version of R, which is another issue, for example, that comes up through this process that we've thought about, and we're thinking about how to deal with that. But I do think we answer these processes, these kinds of things iteratively, we talk through them, and a lot of times we realize there's no one right answer. So I want to turn this over, but I want to say one more thing, which is that's another reason why we do this, because a lot of times, when you're developing these models, you have to make a decision. Do I do this or do I do that? And of course, we try and explore that. And we look at the consequences of doing this or that or whatever. But ultimately, we all know we like to think science is objective, but it really is a lot of subjective decisions that you hope are making the best thing. And so I always say to my students when we're publishing, well, did we do the right decision? Did we do the right decision? Well, you know what? If it's out there and we've documented what we've done and we've given justification for it, someone down the road can say, we don't think this is the right decision now based on what we know, and we can change it and update it. And that's how science is, right? And it's also related to the mistakes. One of the things we hear all the time is, I think one of the biggest worries, I don't know if this happened so much when Kayla was there, but before, it was like, I'm so nervous to put my stuff out there because what if I made a mistake? What if there's a mistake in my data or in my code? And then people find it and we did something wrong and it affects the publication. And by the way, I want to say that has happened to us. So far, we haven't found any really major ones, but we also have a process for how we kind of update it on the website if we find mistakes, and that is, it's scary. And it's scary to be like, okay, maybe our work wasn't right. But I also try and think about that as being like part of science too. Like they're honest mistakes. And I do think we are careful, and, we have a lot of checks in the lab to make sure that we're careful. But mistakes definitely happen, and there are mistakes in our publications. I know it. I know that there are mistakes in our publications, and I'm sure there are mistakes we haven't even found yet, right? And that's just the reality. And all I can say is like, they're honest, and, if we find them, we hope to correct them. It's embarrassing. We don't want to have that, but it's just the reality of the situation. I think that was one big hump, also for people to get over. Like, it's really nerve-wracking to put your stuff up there because somebody can find a mistake in your publication and you feel bad for that, especially junior scientists when it's their first couple of publications, so I am really sensitive to that as well,
So there's another lesson learned right there. Plan to be making mistakes, like know it's going to happen and have a process, like own it, like just plan ahead, do everything you can. That's a great lessons learned. Do everything you can. Be as authentic as you can, be as quality check as you can, but know you're humans and you can't possibly be perfect.
Yeah. And when you make those mistakes and it feels bad, try the best that you can to correct it. We talk it through. Like, I'll tell you, for example, there's a small mistake on an ecology paper, and I'm the lead author. Zipkin et al. 2017. If you go to that archive on there, it's there. And so actually, it was one of our co-authors that found it after publication. He's like, I don't think this graph could be this way. And it's true. We published a slightly earlier version. Like, we published the figure earlier on with one version earlier of the final version of the thing. We just didn't update it. I think we did that, in the revision stage, right? So we kind of debated, should we tell this? Do we want to? And I don't know if this is the right answer. Like, we were like, okay, do we want to go back to the Ecology journal, and say and ask and publish like a, what's the word? Correction or errata. And we actually decided not to, because it was a component in the model that was an application, and we didn't think it was like extremely relevant. And it actually didn't change it kind of changes the y-axis, but not the like shape. And so what we did is, we decided, we talked about it as a group, by the way, the co-authors, and we decided to add, I'll put up the repo as soon as I stop with this, but we added a little talk about of the erratum. We put the updated figure so people could see it. And we just wrote, what the updated code or whatever, keep a few sentences about it and things. And we decided that was okay, because anybody who like really cared, didn't change the outcome of what we're doing. Anybody who really cared would probably come here. Again, that's a judgment that we decided to make,
Yep.
but we didn't feel like we could just do nothing and pretend it was okay. But we also just didn't feel it mattered that much to go through the process of the erratum, which, you know, if someone is an editor at Ecology, or maybe they'll feel differently, but you know, that was the decision we made. So
there's not an easy answer to stuff, right? There's a group working on data ethics, and this is a great example for, you know, when it didn't really impact your research outcomes and it's a minor element. What do you do? And that's one way, right?
That's just what we decided to do. And the authors agreed. I'm going to put up the repo here and you can see it.
Talk about super transparent. Not only do you talk about your mistakes, but you show them to a group of, you know, nearly 100 people. Oh, by the way, here's my mistake. I just want you to see it.
Let me, I gotta find out where I did it. Yeah. Oh, there's a corrected figure. And then if you pull up the code to making it. So in this repo, there's a corrected figure. And if you pull up the code to making that figure at the top of the code, it will explain the mistake and how it happened.
Incredible. So Kayla, can you talk, when you're looking at code, can you talk about those, you know, what are you looking for that actually helps make something understandable to others?
Yeah, so comments are big. Yeah, I think comments are actually the most important part of making it usable to other people. I mean, other than having all of the components there to actually, you know, reproduce what you did, making sure that it's always commented is really the most useful thing that I'm looking for when, you know, we're going through and checking that things meet up to our lab standards. So, you know, of course, I'm looking to make sure all the pieces are there, but do I even understand what's going on here? And I'm not looking at it and trying to, when I'm going through and checking, I'm not spending a ton of time doing that, but you know, enough to understand, like, okay, well, this piece does this piece does this. And if I understand that, then I think someone who has read the paper and is looking for the information should be able to find what they're looking for.
So some people are really intimidated about how poorly they comment. All right, so let's just be honest. There's a lot of researchers that, you know, they're quick and dirty code. It's not commented. It's not nicely organized. They never went to, you know, no one showed them how to do it, right? So when you read a comment, can you, like, for instance, I'm thinking about like input, output, what were the routines? What would constitute a decent comment?
Yeah, so this is a really good question, because I don't think there's any like perfect or right way to do this, as long as it's understandable. So I'm not somebody who is I didn't come into coding from like some kind of computer science background. I'm completely self-taught on this, which a lot of us are. And, you know, really, when I am commenting, it's to myself. And I think the most useful thing that you can do if you're doing this is try as much as possible not to just code a crazy amount on the fly without writing out what it's doing. You know, before you start something, make a quick little comment to remind yourself when you go back to it, oh, okay, this is what this did. I think that's the biggest way to avoid a situation where you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know what this is. And when you go back to your code to make it available to everyone before you put it out to the public, you know, I've definitely had the situation where I have a very messy code that I need to clean up before a publication goes out, and I don't really know what the heck I was doing. And then you have to spend a lot of time going through that code and like re-commenting it out. But when I'm doing it, I make a quick little, you know, one sentence comment. And sometimes it's like, hey, this does blah, blah, blah. Or this is a silly step to do X, Y, and Z. I mean, sometimes it's kind of silly, but you know, as long as it explains what's happening, I think that's good enough. It doesn't have to be some kind of perfectly formatted thing.
So what I just heard you say is, when you're designing and developing a new set of code algorithms, you actually write out in English, like the steps. And
Yeah,
then you
yeah.
you use those sentences to actually be an initial comment for each of the sections. That helps you organize yourself.
Right.
And maybe you'll go back and fill in a little bit of detail as you finish out the development. That's what I
Yeah.
heard you say. Okay.
Yes, definitely. I mean, really, when I'm making my code, I have this idea in my head. Okay, this is what I need to do, and I might make like a table of contents at the top that says, okay, this is data. This is a section for data processing, and then I'll have all the little steps like loading the data in, getting rid of columns I don't need, or something like that. And then there will be, you know, a model code section, and that is commented out step by step by step. So it's not super formal by any means.
But you keep yourself organized. That's
Exactly.
cool. That's really cool. Those basic elements are like a no-brainer, right? Like, just do this.
Well, it's not really a no-brainer. I mean, that's something I had to learn through mistakes and seeing other people's code. I mean, that is a real benefit of being in the lab and having this job of being the one who goes through the other people's code. I mean, that's not something we do unless we're like really looking for, unless we're going through a publication and going to other people's code, right? You don't really often see other people's code that they're actively working on. And so that's been a real benefit for me in how I have developed my own workflow. And it's obviously a work in progress all the time. I might see something tomorrow from another lab mate and say, oh, wow, that's a really good way of organizing this. That would make my workflow a lot easier. So it's, you know, there's a real benefit to looking at other people's code, I think.
And there's another good example. Go look at other people's stuff. And maybe that's something that even AGU can do, that we can provide examples of, hey, these guys do clean code. These are good examples to show. That's a great idea for me. We can transition to questions from the folks that are online. And I saw that Anne, hi Anne, thanks for being here. Anne had a question. Elise, you looked like you were poised to answer that. Do you want to go ahead?
Sure. So Anne asked this question about when do you do this? Like when do you put the code up there? And we talk about this a lot, actually. Okay. And so one, I want to make a comment for the nature of our research. I don't think that it has to be, this might be different in different times, but it doesn't really have to be before it's vetted. And I mean by that peer review, because I don't think that there's anything that we have that's so urgent or important that it has to get out at really early stages. So having said that, we've decided as a lab that people can put it up when they want, and the latest they can put it up is when the paper is published. So when it's been accepted and published, that's when you get a front-facing page. We don't actually put up that front page. Usually we don't. Occasionally, if somebody's really interested, we don't usually put it up on the front-facing page until it's done. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Some of them are just workflow reasons. People are maybe doing it on their own GitHub, and then they have to push it over to the GitHub, the Zipkin Lab GitHub organization. So people don't tend to do that until the paper is published. And I get that, because otherwise you're like kind of pushing and pulling like multiple times. So it just creates more work. And then the other reason we have for that is and people have different ways that they do it. Some people prefer, like I said, to sort of only include what was the final correct thing. And that always needs to be really well indicated. You know, that's part of the policies in the lab. Like the final version has to be very clearly annotated and what is and clearly denoted as the final version. But some people in our lab, are happy to show and do the full process of what they do. So there might be like a lot of versions that they have on there. And we decided that's personal preference. Like, you have to, that's the idea of the minimum standard. You have to have it out there when it's published. If you feel that this isn't something you want to share and there are a variety of very legitimate reasons why people don't want to share it before things are published, that we've come into, then you don't have to. If you're not comfortable with that, you can have it as a private repo, or you can not have it up there and you're doing your own version control somewhere else. But once it's been accepted, it has to come up there. And I think that question of when's a good time is something that does change for different projects. Sometimes we have something that's really important. It's a response to something else and we want to get out there. We put it on a preprint. Sometimes I had a paper, some high impact papers that I really didn't want to share preprint versions. And I'm glad I didn't, because I felt that, edits during peer review made it better. So I'm kind of happy I don't have the earlier versions out in the world. Those are personal preferences. And I think there are good reasons why people make the decisions either way. But I think the bottom line has to be is when that paper is accepted. So when it's in a journal and it's available to the people, that info has to be there then. So that usually happens for us in the lab, within a week of a paper being accepted or so.
Yep. Yep. So Stuart, hi Stuart, glad you're here. Stuart is supporting Kayla's comments, but also asking a question, how do you recruit graduate students that have no coding experience? Or do you?
Yeah, I don't, yeah, they just learn. Or I mean, even if they have coding experience, a lot of the times, I think pretty much almost everybody in the lab hadn't done kind of Bayesian model analysis. So in that we use like JAGs, Nimble. So even if they knew about R, they don't know about the other thing, but that's like kind of grad school. I mean, you just learn it, and that's fine. I would not feel that I have to recruit someone that has that experience. I mean, that's a bonus if they do, but I think that's kind of the point of grad school. So yeah, they'll just learn it. And what Kayla's saying, I think everybody in the lab, has become a better coder through the process of being times the lab, even postdocs, hopefully. I mean, I think that's kind of the purpose of research. We're always getting better. And, they just can start at different points. And if they start at a different point, I taught like I've taught like introductions to R stuff. So we give them some manuals, hand them over. Okay, start working on it and talk with the other people in the lab, when you run into problems. And we also, I mean, even if they know stuff they don't know how to do, nobody's like, familiar with our HPCC, the High Performance Computing Center. How do we send jobs through there? So everybody's always learning. And I think that's fine if they don't have it.
Of interest, have you ever had undergraduate students in the lab?
Yes. So we have undergraduate students. We haven't had one that has done a first authored paper yet. We're sort of working on it. But yeah, we give them that manual. They're working on it. Usually they sit, I mean, it's different now with COVID, but we're in the same room. The students are all in the same room and they can ask each other questions. Were you there, Kayla, like when Weston was there? And so you probably have more experience actually sitting in the room with them, but you could, and other ones, that we have.
Yeah, I mean, so we had a summer undergrad researcher in our lab the first summer I was there. And, he just came in just like we all do. And I don't think he knew much coding prior to coming into the lab, but, just like any other student, he asked questions. We helped him through it. So, yeah, I don't think it's a huge hurdle coming in without coding experience because everybody learns it.
That statement, but would also say, I've seen situations already where a student takes my informatics class, they want to get into the research, but then they get into it and they go, ooh, I don't like this at all. It's like, this is not science enough for me. I feel like I'm a computer nerd and I don't like that. So it takes, you got to kind of almost spot the right kind of person too, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good question. We're kind of really open to letting any undergrads that kind of want to try, they can come in and see what, I'm not like that high bar on that. But of course, like as I'm choosing graduate students, I always try and like make that really clear. Like, it's the same thing, even for that R review student, like, when they're saying to me like, oh, I love butterflies. This was a Monarch project. I love butterflies and they're so pretty. I'm like, okay, you're going to hate being in our lab, in front of a computer. So I do try and spend a lot of time talking to them. I mean, certainly for the graduate students to make sure that it's a good fit and they like what we're doing. And, for us, like when grad students and postdocs or anybody interviews for the lab, I'm always like, talk to other people in lab, about what it's like. So they get, an understanding and they know what it's like and what it's like to work with me and all those things. So I think, that all falls into it.
And just as a small aside, before we get too far, so this seminar series is partially funded by the National Science Foundation. And I did notice that Zipkin Lab was just highlighted in a National Science Foundation post this week. I don't know if you saw that, Elise, but you were. I'll have to send it to you. So, huge kudos to our funder for highlighting and allowing us to work together like this. So this is really cool.
Yeah, thanks a lot to NSF. They've funded a lot of this work. And also I have to say there's another good thing about NSF on the open science side. So, there's two ways that I think this evolves in my head, like the open science side. One is the students come in with new ideas, which happens all the time. That's probably the biggest thing. They're coming in there. Honestly, I think they're the ones that found Zenodo, right? Because we kind of started this before putting stuff on Zenodo was a thing, right? And now it's a thing or whatever. But the other way that I learn a lot of stuff is when I'm writing a new proposal, really for NSF, because that with the data management plan and those different things, that is the time that I spend time looking up, okay, what's the latest, standards? Because I'm not like regularly looking up what's the standards on open science or on, data, open data and code. Really, I'm just doing what I think is logical. But I do think the other time I do it, which is extremely valuable, is when I'm writing a proposal. And that's when I learn about, oh, there's these new advances. There's this resource out there. There's this way to do it. And that's also really helpful. So I do think applying for grants is another thing that keeps us, aware of what's going out in the field.
Oh, you just gave me another idea. I wonder if we can help that for our own researchers. Here's the latest when you go write your data management. Oh my gosh, that's a brilliant idea. Okay, Chris, I hope you're listening.
Because Stuart said it's really hard to keep up with everything. And I think that's true. I'm not like looking at the value of things in latest open science. And like I said, we are kind of homegrown, grassroots. So we're just doing what we think is logical, but it is really helpful every once in a while to get out, okay, what's going on with other people. And I do think that comes in two ways, like the students, the postdocs, they're, I feel like they're paying more attention to it, and which is great, and then the second is when I'm forced to think about this data management plan kind of things, which is also great.
So you mentioned Zenodo. We know that Zenodo has a really nice bridge from GitHub, and that's how you get your DOIs for certain packages, certain releases. And Jeff asked a question about as your code evolves and your version numbers and DOIs assigned, so things can be explicitly identified by downstream users and their publications. I think I probably didn't read that as a question, but that there is a question there. So can you talk about, like, you have your lab GitHub, how do you integrate Zenodo and how does that work?
So the main thing is, again, they can be separate. We really do need to talk about this. Kayla, let's put it on the docket of whether or not each thing has to be Zenodo. That's actually not part of our minimum requirement. Now it just starts to happen because it's kind of ending up being a requirement of funders or publications. So I think I would guess, Kayla would know for sure, but I would say probably in the last 2 or 3 years, all our papers and code have been on Zenodo, but you would know for sure. Is that true?
Yeah, that is true. And as far as the version control goes, we do, if we have released multiple versions, we do give it a separate version so people can cite that specific version. But that really only happens if, like Elise says, we have released this and given it a DOI prior to the final publication version. So if we've released it during the revision stage and we go back and make some changes as a part of the revisions process, then we'll re-release it and give it a new version number, and that will be documented. But a lot of the stuff that we've done, most of it has been just a final release, so it only has one version.
And then I would say the other thing about that for us also within there is this README file. So if you go into the repos, all the repos have a README file, and we do put DOIs of papers and different things up there, the final DOIs of the code and stuff. So, that's another thing I really recommend on these is a README file, because then you can always update that. And frankly, we can update the README file right now, if a new thing comes up and we feel like we want to update that. So yeah. I do think that README file is really beneficial as well. And it describes, one of the things the README file is supposed to describe what are all the different files that are in this archive, and all of our README files are done the same way, right? They all have the same structure. So if you start going through our code archive and you look at different ones, you should, get an understanding of how we're doing it.
Very nice. So for AGU journals, we're delighted when the researchers are using GitHub, but we know that's not a preservation site as much as we love it. And so we do encourage that connection over to Zenodo. but you know that it's not perfect. Like it takes the monikers, you don't actually get the author names, the orchids don't come across necessarily, you have to fix the titles. So I'm just saying that out loud. It's really fantastic, but it's not perfect. And just take a minute to fix all that and get the orchids in and connect it also.
I think with that, it's also really important is all these things take time. And I really want to acknowledge that because it is sort of this thing that's like not exact. I mean, it's not valued, like, for example, for tenure, like none of this that we're doing was on my tenure package. Maybe there's like one line that's like, and I run a code archive, like, I mean, there's not this thing. And I do think that's, if there's a way, I mean, the value that we have is like, we create these models, we want them used, we want them transparent, and we don't want to be embarrassed, right? So like, that's why we do it. But it would be nice if there's ways that, and I don't know what the answer is for this, but that it can be valued in like the publication or post-processing word. And I don't know what those change are. I mean, somebody said in this ESA roundtable, when we talked about it, you just have to value it, like if you're reviewing NSF proposals, you put that in there as, a value, whether or not these people are doing it or how they've done with their last data management or, different things. So I don't know how to make that change, but I acknowledge that it takes a long time and that in this world, when there's a million things to do, it's hard.
Can I foot stomp that for just a second? So I know there's going to be there's a lot of folks on live. There's going to be a lot of folks that watch this later. And so the foot stomp is, listen, here you have a lab that's creating models that are literally usable by others in an easy way. Like they're taking the time to document and make sure the code is running perfectly, at least at that moment, and with all the supporting information, including how to get the data in there. So that people, hello funders, hello institutions, that needs to be part of our impact on science. So in the reports that come back, when Elise writes about what the lab did brilliantly, it's the broad impact on science is that reusability, the fact that it was easy and designed for reuse. And that should be part of promotion and tenure, because if it's easy for other researchers, then it's easy to build on that work. And it's incredible. So, foot stomp.
Yeah, I'm going to put that more in my reports and things.
Do it.
But, I should. And you should too, Kayla. It should be on your CVs too, the students, like all that work you guys do.
It really should. And I know there's folks online that are in the middle of this. The work that's happening at AAU and APLU, Sarah Nusser's online right now. She's doing work on reuse. And Ishel Faniel is also doing work on reuse. So just really, really want to foot stomp that. We are at the top of our hour. Laura, do you mind popping up our closing slide, please? I thank you to Elise and Kayla. This has been an absolutely amazing hour. Really incredible on learning about what's happening at the lab and what reproducibility means and how others can do that as well. And then coming up in a month, we have the democratization of data with Dr. Sabina Leonelli and Dr. Louise Bazudenhout. Okay, I'm going to continue to practice Louise's name. And they both have previously worked together, but now at the University of Exeter and Oxford. And they're going to walk us through so many of the challenges that currently exist around democratization of data. And we're really excited to have them. Elise and Kayla, thank you so much. I am just so excited to have you today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us. This was really cool. It's fun to talk about. And it kind of like, we don't think about it in this way so much. We're just kind of in the moment of process of doing it. So I think this is also valuable for us to,
Yep, I feel like and maybe soon we'll do this walk through this particular recording, and maybe I'll do this in the Zenodo entry. So we put the recording in a Zenodo entry, and I'll walk through all of your recommendations. This happened and that happened. Yes, so maybe that could be a start for a best practice for any lab.
That would be cool. Much.
Thank you very much. And thanks to everybody for being here.